You've just been fired, thrown in prison, tortured a bit, and then exiled to your countryside estate. What do? If you're Niccolò Machiavelli, you write the most controversial political handbook in Western history and dedicate it to the guy who basically ruined your life. Talk about optimism. Machiavelli penned The Prince in 1513. He wasn't trying to become the poster child for political ruthlessness. He was essentially writing a very elaborate job application. Dear Lorenzo, please hire me. Here's everything I know about power. Love, Niccolò. Spoiler alert, Lorenzo probably never even read it. Imagine writing a 26-chapter masterpiece and having it go straight to the Renaissance equivalent of spam. But here's the beautiful irony. This failed attempt at getting back into politics became one of the most influential books ever written. It's like accidentally creating a viral meme while trying to send a serious email to your boss. To understand why Machiavelli wrote what he wrote, we need to talk about the absolute chaos that was Renaissance Italy, and I mean chaos. Imagine if every major city in your country was its own independent nation, constantly backstabbing each other, forming alliances, breaking them, and occasionally setting monks on fire in public squares. That was Italy. Machiavelli was born in Florence in 1469, right in the heart of the Renaissance. Now, when you think Renaissance, you probably picture beautiful art, intellectual enlightenment, and people in fancy hats discussing philosophy. You're not wrong, but you're also missing the murders, conspiracies, and political drama that would make Game of Thrones look like a children's puppet show. Florence at this time was technically a republic. I say technically because it was really run by the Medici family, the original political dynasty. Think of them as the Kardashians of the Renaissance, except instead of reality TV, they controlled banks, sponsored artists, and occasionally orchestrated political coups. The key player during Machiavelli's youth was Lorenzo de' Medici, Lorenzo the Magnificent, they called him. Not to be confused with Lorenzo II de' Medici, his grandson, to whom Machiavelli would later dedicate The Prince. I know, the Medicis weren't very creative with names. It's like when you name your Wi-Fi network Wi-Fi and your printer, Printer.
After Lorenzo the Magnificent died, things got weird. A Dominican monk named Savonarola essentially took over Florence and turned it into a theocracy. Florence had been known for its, shall we say, relaxed moral standards. Art, parties, beautiful clothes, fun stuff. Savonarola was having none of it. He banned parties, burned artworks he deemed amoral, including some pieces we'd probably consider priceless today, and basically tried to turn Renaissance Florence into a monastery. Imagine someone showing up at a party and not only turning off the music, but also burning the speaker system and lecturing everyone about their life choices. Unsurprisingly, the Florentines eventually had enough. In what might be history's most ironic twist, the guy who loved burning stuff got burned himself, right in the public square in 1498. Florence's response was essentially, "We tried the super religious thing, didn't love it. Let's go back to being a republic." This is where Machiavelli enters center stage. After Savonarola's fiery exit, Florence returned to being a republic, and Machiavelli snagged a job in the government. He started with administrative tasks, the political equivalent of filing paperwork and making coffee, but when Piero Soderini became leader, Machiavelli got promoted to one of his key advisors. Suddenly, Machiavelli was traveling on diplomatic missions, negotiating with the French, meeting with the infamous Borgia family. Yes, that Borgia family from the TV show, though the real version was somehow even more scandalous. He was in the thick of it, learning how power actually worked, not how philosophy books said it should work. But here's where everything falls apart. Pope Julius II, who supported the Medici family, decided it was time to restore them to power in Florence. There was a crucial battle at Prato in 1512, and Soderini's forces got absolutely wrecked. The Medicis waltzed back into Florence, and suddenly Machiavelli, who had worked for the Republic, was on the wrong side of history. He was arrested, accused of conspiracy, which he probably didn't actually do, tortured on the rack, which definitely happened and definitely was not fun, and then exiled to his estate outside the city. From political insider to unemployed exile in a matter of weeks. Talk about a bad year. Stuck in the countryside with nothing but time and bitterness, Machiavelli did what any rational person would do. He wrote a book explaining exactly how to seize and maintain political power, and he dedicated it to Lorenzo II de' Medici, the new prince of Florence. His pitch was basically, "Hey Lorenzo, I know your family just destroyed my career and tortured me, but look at all this valuable knowledge I have. Hire me back, please." It's like your company firing you and then you sending them a manual on how to run the business better, hoping they'll realize they made a terrible mistake. Spoiler, they usually don't. Lorenzo II probably never even cracked the book open. Some historians aren't even sure he received it. Imagine spending months crafting the perfect piece of political philosophy only to have it completely ignored by the one person you wanted to impress. That's not just failure, that's poetic failure. But wait, it gets more ironic. The Medici rule eventually collapsed again, and Machiavelli, who had been trying to get in their good graces, was then suspected of being too friendly with them by the people who opposed them. He couldn't win. He was literally too Republican for the Medicis and too Medici-friendly for the Republicans. The man was politically homeless.
Here's where it gets interesting. Even though the prince failed at its original purpose, it succeeded at something far more important. It completely revolutionized how we think about politics. Before Machiavelli, political philosophy was all about ideals. How should rulers behave? What's the perfect form of government? Plato wrote about philosopher kings who would rule with perfect wisdom. Aristotle talked about constitutions designed to make citizens virtuous. Christian political thought emphasized that rulers governed by divine right and should uphold moral and religious principles. Everyone was obsessed with how politics should work in a perfect world. Machiavelli looked at all this and essentially said, "That's adorable, but let me tell you how politics actually works." Let me give you an example that shows exactly how radical Machiavelli's approach was. In Chapter 7 of The Prince, he tells a story about Cesare Borgia. Yes, the son of Pope Alexander VI. Yes, popes had kids back then. It was complicated. Cesare had just conquered Romagna, a region that was basically in chaos. The previous rulers had been incompetent, and the place was full of violence, crime, and general disorder. So what did Cesare do? He appointed a guy named Ramiro de Orco to govern the region and gave him complete authority to restore order. Ramiro was brutal. He cracked down hard on crime, punished violators severely, and got things under control. Order was restored. But here's the problem. People started to hate Cesare because of Ramiro's cruelty. The methods worked, but they were creating a PR nightmare. So Cesare made a calculated decision. One morning, he had Ramiro arrested and executed. But not just executed, he had him cut in half and displayed in the public square with a wooden block and a bloody knife beside him. Machiavelli's description, the people were satisfied and stupefied. Now, pause for a moment. A traditional Christian political philosopher would have condemned this entire episode. An ancient philosopher like Plato would have talked about how this violated the ideal of justice. But Machiavelli? He praises Cesare for this move. Why? Because it worked. Cesare used cruelty when necessary to restore order. Good. Then, when that cruelty started making him unpopular, he distanced himself from it by executing his own minister in a spectacular fashion. Clever. The result? Order was maintained, the people stopped hating Cesare, but they were also reminded to fear his power. It's manipulative, it's brutal, and it's absolutely not what Jesus would do. But Machiavelli's point is, this is what actually works in the real world of politics. Machiavelli's approach was revolutionary for several reasons. First, he rejected the idea that politics should be guided primarily by Christian morality. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't saying rulers should be evil, but he was saying that sometimes to protect your state and your people, you need to do things that aren't exactly Sunday school material. A ruler must be loved when possible, but feared when necessary. He should be honest when he can, but willing to deceive when he must. Think less turn the other cheek and more speak softly and carry a big stick. Second, he threw out the idealistic philosophy of ancient thinkers. Plato's philosopher kings, great in theory, never happened in practice. Aristotle's perfect constitutions, lovely idea, but show me where they actually existed. Machiavelli looked at actual history, messy, bloody, complicated history, and based his advice on that instead. Third, he was deeply pessimistic about human nature. People aren't naturally virtuous, he argued. They're selfish, inconsistent, and easily swayed. A ruler who assumes people will always do the right thing is a ruler who's about to get overthrown. You need to plan for humans as they are, not as you wish they'd be.
Machiavellian, as an adjective, has come to mean manipulative, scheming, and morally empty. It suggests someone who'll do absolutely anything to gain power with no principles whatsoever. But that's not actually what Machiavelli was arguing. Yes, he said the ends justify the means, but he wasn't talking about any ends. He had a specific goal in mind, the preservation and stability of the state, which ultimately protects the people. For Machiavelli, a good ruler isn't someone who's cruel for the sake of being cruel. A good ruler is someone who loves their country and people so much that they're willing to make hard choices, choices that might stain their soul to protect them. There's a famous quote attributed to Machiavelli, "I love my country more than my soul." That's the essence of his political realism. It's not about being evil. It's about being willing to do what's necessary, even when it's morally uncomfortable, because the alternative, chaos, invasion, the suffering of your people, is worse. Here's something fascinating. Most discussions of Machiavelli focus on all the ruthless stuff in the middle chapters, but they ignore the final chapter of The Prince, which actually reveals what Machiavelli really cared about. In that last chapter, Machiavelli drops the cool, analytical tone and makes an impassioned plea for someone, anyone, to unify Italy. He's watched his country tear itself apart with internal conflicts for decades. He's seen foreign powers, France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, treat Italy like a battlefield for their own conflicts. What Machiavelli desperately wanted was for Italy to become strong and unified, capable of defending itself. All his advice about being willing to use cruelty, deception, and force when necessary wasn't about creating tyrants. It was about creating a ruler strong enough to actually unite and protect Italy. Think of it this way. If you're drowning and someone needs to punch you in the face to get you to stop panicking so they can save you, that punch isn't cruelty, it's necessity. That's how Machiavelli saw tough political decisions. So how did this ignored job application become one of the most important books in Western political thought? After Machiavelli died in 1527, still out of favor, still unemployed from politics, still bitter, The Prince started circulating among intellectuals and political elites, and people were shocked. Here was someone saying the quiet part out loud, all the stuff that rulers actually did that philosophers pretended didn't happen. Machiavelli was not only acknowledging it, but analyzing it systematically. The book was controversial, condemned by the Catholic Church, but it was also incredibly influential. Why? Because it was useful. If you actually wanted to understand how power worked, not how it should work in some imaginary utopia, Machiavelli was your guy. Over the centuries, political thinkers built on Machiavelli's realism. Thomas Hobbes, writing during the English Civil War a century later, would face similar questions about order versus chaos. His Leviathan argued that a strong sovereign needed both the scepter, moral and religious authority, and the sword, coercive power and military force. Sound familiar? That's pure Machiavelli, the balance between moral legitimacy and practical force, always in service of protecting the state and its people. So what's the final verdict on Machiavelli? He wasn't a mustache-twirling villain teaching people how to be evil. He was a pragmatic observer of politics who'd seen too much idealism lead to disaster. He'd watched good, moral leaders fail because they weren't willing to make tough decisions. He'd seen his city conquered because its rulers valued being liked over being effective. His message wasn't be cruel. It was be realistic.
understand that politics is complicated, that moral purity and political effectiveness sometimes conflict, and that a ruler's first responsibility is to protect their state and people, even if that means getting their hands dirty. In Machiavelli's world, the worst sin a ruler could commit wasn't being occasionally ruthless, it was being weak and ineffective, thereby allowing their people to suffer under chaos or foreign conquest. Why Machiavelli still matters. We're now 500 years past Machiavelli, and we still argue about his ideas. That's because he forced us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Politics isn't a philosophy seminar where everyone debates the good and the just until they reach perfect consensus. Politics is about power. Who has it, how they use it, how they keep it, and what they do with it. You can ignore that reality and pretend politics is only about noble ideals, or you can acknowledge it and try to use power responsibly. Machiavelli chose acknowledgement. He looked at the messy, violent, complicated reality of Renaissance Italian politics and tried to make sense of it. His analysis wasn't pretty, but it was honest. And sometimes, honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, is exactly what we need. So the next time someone calls something Machiavellian, remember, they're probably not using the term correctly. Real Machiavellian thinking isn't about being evil. It's about being clear-eyed, pragmatic, and willing to make hard choices for the greater good. It's about loving your country more than your soul, even if that country never gives you your job back.